Hello and welcome to Crafty Magic Arts. Today we're making something a little bit different and a little interesting. Can you tell where it's from? So we're going to start off with these two ponies. I actually have two separate ones here. They're pieces from other ponies that I have modified in the past, but they work well together and they have the shape that I desire. First I'm prepping the ponies. I don't need that as I like to glue and adhere the ponies. I don't need them to actually be articulated, so removing that piece. And now I'm going to remove the hair. Pretty simple process, cut it all off, and then you just have to make sure that you poke it out or pull it out. There's the tail, it's done. And now moving on to the head, but this time I'm using some needle nose pliers. Now with all the hair removed, I can remove the eyes. This was a challenge, I will say, because I didn't know what best way to do it. Eventually I just gave up and actually just cut it right out from the front. It does leave a larger hole this way, but it does work for what I need it for. Now both gems have been removed. I will save those. And here is the pony. Creepy AF. I'm trimming down the side of the neck here so it actually fits better to the pony and at the angle I specifically want it for. I want the pony to actually be looking more down, so I do make some more alterations to the pony's neck in order to make that happen. Using some foam, I'm going to close up the eyes and then add a lot of hot glue to hold it in place. Like I do with most of my ponies, I do throw some rocks in the body and then I need to fill it up, and this time I'm using polyfill instead of my regular hot glue. I'm shoving in some of this fill because I didn't want the pony to be too heavy, but I want it to be filled up. Here's the fill, and it takes about 24 hours for that to fully dry, but the feet are solid with the rocks. With the hot glue dry, I now add polyfill to the head to give it the same level of treatment. And moving on. Now that the polyfill is filled and dried, I fill the remainder with hot glue, and I do this for both the body and the head just to add a little extra weight, plus just to have that extra bit. It seemed to shrink, so it just fills in that extra gap. Here I'm attempting to glue it, but actually I decide to forego that, clean it up, and use the tip of the hot glue gun to make a hole so I can add in this wooden dowel. The dowel will add extra strength and it will allow for a better connection point. Right now there isn't a lot actually touching with the angle, so I need to create something for the glue to adhere to. With the dowel firmly in place, I now put them together with some super glue and line up the lines. To make sure there's no gap, I fill in it with hot glue. And now moving on to some Epoxy Sculpt. Got my gloves on, they're looking good. And making sure I get the sculpt ready. I've mentioned this before, but Epoxy Sculpt is a type of clay that it's not air dry, it actually cures. So you add the two different pieces together and then you can cure it on whatever you want. It works really well on vinyl and plastic, so you don't have to worry about putting it in the oven. And it is really hard sandable, and it works really great for like making sure that everything is seamless. So I'm adding it to the pony's neck, eyes, where the hair would be, anything else. Now here you can actually see that I am sanding the pony in a plastic bag. That just allows you to actually see what I'm doing. Bag worked well for visibility, but honestly this whole process wasn't needed as everything you see here gets covered up anyways. So moving on to the hat, I'm using aluminum foil to kind of rough out the base for the top part of it. The hat itself is actually critical to the character's design, so I'm actually taking my time to really get the proportion correct and using the foil to kind of hash that out. I don't just use foil though, I move on to adding some Bacon Bond onto the foil to allow for Super Sculpey Ultralight to stick directly onto the foil. This was actually not really needed as I do take the foil out later as much as I can, but it helped with just sculpting it. And here it is fully baked and on the pony's head and looking pretty good. It does have some cracks and it's not perfect, but there's a lot of stuff that's still going to happen to this to make it work. So here I'm actually cleaning up the ridges. I honestly don't like ultralight. I have a hard time getting it smooth or the way I want it to look. So a lot of the times I fix it up later, but not without issues as you saw there. Now I'm moving on to adding on some of this paper. So I'm actually doing like a Mod Podging thing, paper mache I guess, with just Mod Podge to glue and create more stability to the hat and more shape. There's many layers to making this hat actually work, but for now I'm actually going to work on the rim of the hat and come back to the rest later, as you'll see. So if you haven't guessed yet, I'm making a giant hat because I'm creating Big Hat Logan from Dark Souls. This was actually a specific request from my husband, as he loves that game, and he thought it'd be a challenge to mix the IPs of Big Hat Logan and My Little Pony. So I took up the challenge and decided to go whole hog on this whole thing and create something, not just the hat, but everything in between, which you will see later in the video. I do paper mache the whole hat together, and now it looks pretty good. And here's some of my reference photos for Big Hat Logan. I want to make sure the hat looks pretty good, so I'm adding on some of my Hearty Clay, which I have come to absolutely love. Some of the folds there were added with just the side of my brush, and it looks pretty good, but there will be more. Don't worry, lots and lots more of Hearty Clay to be added, as you can see here. Making sure it gets a little light sanding. The one thing I'll say about Hearty Clay is it does not sand well. It's like a foam clay, so yeah. Moving on to my reference, I outline all the different separate pieces that I want to add to the pony. As I mentioned before, I want to do everything. Everything in between, including the hat, including the robes, including the belt. And I thought, I'll make it in fabric. It works so well with my Santa Claus, right? Right? Wrong. As you can see here, there's many hours of me attempting various different ways of creating patterns and trying different methods of creating the look I wanted and making sure it looked good, and I didn't have the right fabric. I was just approaching it all wrong. So I move on to what I know best, sculpting. I bust out my Hearty Clay. I also take out my Epoxy Sculpt just in case. I take out other various things that you never know you might need. So I'm just being prepared because I know it's going to be an ordeal. I have my Hearty Clay on the pony. Honestly, this stuff works really good, especially if you actually mix it with Mod Podge, because it adheres really well to the pony. Here I'm creating the layers of the sleeves, and I've added on the boots. Honestly, sculpting is the way I was always meant to create this pony. I don't know why I tried fabric. I was way too ambitious. I think the Santa pony just gave me way too much false confidence. This pony has various different, or this character, will be a pony, but he's, you know, the character itself has many different layers and complexities. He's got a scarf, he's got an overshirt, an undershirt, he's wearing a robe that has to go around a pony, and if you've ever tried to create a robe around a pony, it is challenging. So I actually have to create the robe in two separate parts. I'm going to have the area that goes in the front, which I'm creating right here, adding in all the folds and getting it prepped. As a pre-bake, I actually use my heat gun just so it'll keep the shape while I'm transporting it upstairs. And here you can see it's working pretty good. To create the main robe, I do cut out the shape I need in aluminum foil, and then I meticulously cover it in the Sculpey Ultralight so I can have it drape. Again, I'm not a big fan of the product, but it is nice and light. So I was able to take it off, bake it in the oven after I use the heat gun to create some stability, and then I can actually put it on the pony at my leisure. I did remove the aluminum foil you saw there and got it prepped for actually adding to the pony. Now it's not going to be glued onto the pony for quite a while. The reason why is I made it separate so I could actually do all the painting well in advance. There is going to be some overlap of painting that's going to be needed, but this is just a good way to make sure I'm able to get the underside the way I want without having to struggle. Now I'm adding some accessories. I added the bottom of his boots. I'm making some of his bags. They're made using aluminum foil and Epoxy Sculpt. Moving on to the paint, I do work on the skin tone that is happening on the backside of the pony. A lot of the paint I actually use is already pre-mixed, so it's a lot easier for me to go, but I do switch it over to a different color skin tone later on. And now I'm adding his underwear. Yes, I'm adding his underwear. The reason why is because in the game, he goes a little mad, or very mad, and he fights you in just his underwear and his hat, and that's it. So it's part of the lore. So while the robe will not be removable, I find it fun to know that underneath that he is wearing the underwear you would fight him in later. I'm getting the skirt prepped here. It is tattered and torn. The character actually was in a dungeon or in a cage when you first find him in the game, so I wanted to make sure that his clothes is dingy and dirty and tattered, so I'm cutting it up and getting it ready. So I do need to put another layer of clay. I'm out of Hearty Clay, so I opted for this air hardening DOS Junior. Honestly, I showed you that. That is the smallest text, and that's the only reference to it being air hardening on the entire package. It was really hard to know if that actually was going to work, so I took my chances and went for it. It is not as good as Hearty Clay. It actually is separating. I think I need to, now that the pony is done, I have to go back in and fix it. It's separating, even though I added glue, I added this paste, I did everything. I added this, the stuff you're seeing me painting with here is my gesso, my black gesso, and it's really good at making sure things stick. I think I even use black Mod Podge and gesso combination to make sure that it is doubly sticking. Like right here, that is actually what it is. It's not just gesso, it's actually the Mod Podge gesso mix. And the DOS clay still actually came separated, so yeah. As I'm continuing on with painting, I'm adding black gesso with Mod Podge to most of the pieces here. I like to have the black to start. A lot of things actually stay black, but I want this dark undertone to a lot of the paint, so even if it's not going to be black, I do want it to start black. So it's got that deep hue underneath. The top of the robe is actually blue. It's really hard to tell from the reference photos, but I went with blue as per my husband's recommendation. And then I add some trim using gold, keeping in mind all the tatters and the cuts. Here you can see that I did the same thing with the front part of the robe. I did actually use hot glue instead of DOS clay here, mainly just because I didn't want to wait 24 hours, but honestly it worked really well, so I didn't need to add more complexity than I needed. Here I'm adding the gold to the front of the robe as well, and adding blue to the sleeves, the under sleeves, not the over sleeves. There is a difference. These sleeves will eventually be covered in a misting of gold. So now I'm about to be ready to get some stuff together. So I'm putting on the robe now. So I'm putting the front of the robe on and making sure that's nice and stick. It was very fragile, but it did work out quite well. And then I did the same thing with the back of the robe and glued it on, lining it up as much as I could with the front, and then adding hot glue to fill in some of those gaps, as you can see here. Hot glue was not enough, so I did opt to add a little bit of a Epoxy Sculpt to it. So this does mean that I do have to do some fix-ups or touch-ups with my paint, but honestly I still think this is a better solution than trying to paint it after everything's fully sculpted, because while I do have to do some touch-ups underneath, I don't have to do as much of the detail. Like I don't have to worry about the underwear for one, for two, like even the boots and stuff. So it worked out much better, I think, in the long run. While we're waiting for that to cure, I'm going to add some cling wrap here so I can start sculpting the cape. Yes, he's got a cape. And for said cape, I'm using DOS clay again. I will say in this instance, the DOS clay actually worked very well. It was nice and flat, it dried really quickly, and it didn't crack. It's just when you're actually adding it to something else that it doesn't seem to work as well. Independently, it worked well enough, and I actually really like it. So I leave it there to dry, and then I'm actually able to peel it off later. Oh, here I'm actually adding some belts and my bag to make sure that they're going to sit nicely in the clay versus on top of the clay. There, it's removable, and now I'm going to start my tweaks. There was some sanding that happened in between to help with the wrinkles that were left by the plastic, but I didn't film that. So again, I'm just going in with all black because everything started with the base black, so I want to keep to that same look. I want to make sure that everything kind of follows that same theme. The painting luckily is not too complex. All the colors were already pre-mixed or what you find in the bottle, so I was able to do my touch-ups easily enough. It looks really good. The paint did seem a bit too opaque. No, translucent, that's the word. So I did add second layers, and then I also painted the cape. And then moved on to the boots, which I totally forgot to paint brown. So I feel foolish after all my talk of making sure that things were done in advance. Next I had the belt using embroidery floss. I just put it right on there, and then I add the cape directly on top of it. While I didn't sculpt on top of it, it actually worked out really well. I'm making a belt now that I forgot in the early stages, so I'm just cut out a tiny piece of leather, and then I'm just going to glue it directly to the underside, and later I add like the little tail of the belt. I'm painting the bags here. I dab off the brown paint using a piece of paper towel just to help with the making it look old. I'm adding the belts for the straps for the bags. So you got your first bag here, and then you got your side strap. It doesn't go around the front of the pony just because it looked weird, but I think it works well the way it is. The second bag here is going to go on the other side. It just needed these tiny little added details I used with paper, and then it gets glued after. And this little loop is the underside of the belt, and then here I am actually adding the bag to his side. And now moving on to the hat. So the hat's been painted black, but it needs to match what Big Hat Logan has, which he has got a giant gold stripe around it. I do use my gold Posca pen to get that going. It looks really good, very sharp, but I don't like the tone of the gold, so I do repaint it, but it's a really good base coat. Here I'm adding the same rope to the hat to match what he already has, and then adding a little dangly bit on the side, which is something that he has on his hat. And now I'm adding a ton of grunge. So I actually go in and I dry brush him. I use like dark gray brown water. I'm not afraid to really make this pony look a little rough around the edges. It is more gray than anything else. I'm adding in some black to re-highlight the recesses, and it works out. It looks really grungy. And now I'm finally adding on the hat, and it's going to be glued down. Now, I was going to have it so the hat was removable, but it was built literally right around his whole body, and I didn't want to wreck it, so I opted to not do that. And now I'm working on the base. So the base itself, I wasn't actually originally going to have a base, or wasn't sure how I was going to do this, so I actually found this old monitor stand, and I have the monitor still. I'm actually looking at it right now, and I just needed the base of it, so well, why not keep it and reuse it? So I cover it with the holes with foil, fill them in first, add some hot glue. I scuff up the plastic to make sure that it is going to be able to be stuck to really well without things coming out. And then I'm going to put that aside, and I'm going to work on the next piece, which is going to be UV resin. Not going to lie, my UV resin stinks. It's what you get from buying UV resin from AliExpress like 3 years ago, so it worked well enough. I did have to do some tricks to get it not tacky, but what I did was I add some glow powder here, and then I popped the bubbles using my heat gun and used my UV torch to cure it as best as I could. With all the resin work complete, I move on to the acrylic rod, where I rough up the surface to allow for the resin pieces to be adhered to. These are going to be orbs that are going to sit on the rod to make it look like it's hovering above the pony. 2 of these resin pieces actually make an orb, and they're glued directly onto the rod using some super glue and some baking soda, and this is them all on there. Here is some plastic sheeting that I covered in glow paint. I used a mixture of the glow powder and some paint that I had that I mixed in, tinted with a little bit of blue to have some differentiation in color. They're cut to make it look like shards, and then they're glued onto the orbs with hot glue. The CA glue would not work. So I glued them in with hot glue. I did get some strings of hot glue, as you do everywhere, so I just hit that with my heat gun, and that makes those little strings go away. I do want to make sure that the spikes don't move, so I mixed a top coat of glue, I guess, and put it all over, just really put it in there to make sure it's stuck, and now you can see that things are glowing. Back to the base, I am adding in some popsicle sticks, and I've cut off the ends, and now I'm roughing up every single piece of wood. I'm using actually a screw to do this. It allows me to get more texture. I use the tip to like carve in and the side to get additional kind of grooves and cuts, and I also use my X-Acto knife a lot to get additional texture. Here I am painting the base black first and then moving it actually to a reddy brown, just in case you do see through the cracks of the boards. You don't see between the boards. That's okay. I know it's there. You know it's there. It looks good. So here is all the boards are going down. I actually ran out of boards about here, so I'm actually working like at making them as I go and just laying them out nicely. I sand the top to get rid of any splinters, and then I use a wash that I created to darken the wood to the color I want. Now, Dark Soul is a very grungy game. I was thinking about making a more natural base, like a outside scene, but I opted for this wood just because it was a little easier to create, but it is meant to be grungy. So I add some black wash between the cracks. I don't want to make it look pretty at all. And now I'm covering it in Mod Podge just to make sure it is secure. And I do the same with Big Hat Logan here. I do find that my my matte finish wasn't looking very matte, so I actually do fix that later. So here I want to make sure that I can stand up his spells. The reason it's on an acrylic rod is so it looks like it's hovering above him. That is his main spell in the game. So we want to make sure it actually looks like it's hovering above him. It's not perfect. You can still see the clear rod, of course, but it does help give an illusion, at least. It was just that the spells had to be there. Now, Big Hat Logan would be nothing without his staff, so I actually found this piece of driftwood in my collection. Fun fact, when you remove like the top layer, it actually reveals like a color of purple. I did leave it at the very tip, but most of it got carved away. And now I'm actually cutting off the bottom, which I'd already trimmed a little bit, but whatever, toss that off to the side. And now that is going to be the staff. After much carving later, and now the use of the same screw I used for the base, I'm going to rough it up, stain it, darken it up a little bit, just like I did the base. Overall, I start with the same colors, but I actually move on to other colors, which isn't captured in the video. That does allow for some differentiating between the base and the staff. So I add some dry brushes, as you can see here, and also like some other tones of brown, just so it does look different. We are coming up to the end here, so I'm just finishing up the staff, but overall, Big Hat Logan is done. The staff is the final piece to the puzzle, and once we're done this, we will be moving on to the final shots. And here he is, Big Hat Logan. He is fully complete and is now in the custody of my husband, as this was made for him. So honestly, I think he came out really good. There is a lot of little details that is missing, like the hyper detailed fabrics and stuff, but I did capture the essence of Big Hat Logan, and including his magic and his staff. He was approved by my husband. I do really like how he came out. It is definitely hard to photograph him because of his big hat, but of course that's kind of the point. Thank you so much for following along. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks, have a wonderful day. Bye.